I'm going to remain true to it and explain to you some of the context as we go along. So just a very quick introduction about me. I know Katie from my time at IBM. So I have worked the big company circuit. I've done loads of placements. I mean, I've had 3 full front pages on the FT, loads of other TV and other stuff like that. And I got the highest performance of any PR guy at IBM for consecutive years. I ran the financial services sector globally for IBM and got over half the market coverage for a single player, which is a significant achievement, especially as you compare with what happened in the rest of the market. Global issues management, during my beat as the global head of comms for IBM, we had a small thing called the global financial crisis, which led to a great deal of issues management at the time. And I also did spend a lot of time promoting execs, and one of the execs I worked with shortly before I left IBM, I promoted him so he was the 2nd highest profile IBMer in the world after the CEO. I've also worked for smaller companies, my recent work with UK Cloud, doing a lot of employee stuff, getting them recognition across the board, driving their thought leadership, and looking at influencer creation and amplification. And I'll come on to talk about some of that later on. And these days, I do all sorts. I'll do a lot of public speaking. I'm on the television about once a week on broadcast TV, talking about technology. Privacy is one of the main areas I cover. There are a whole set of issues. On the privacy front, I've got my own privacy TV show, and I'll come on to talk about some of the stuff I've been doing specifically in that area, because it's very topical at this moment in time. In government technology, I'm ranked as the #1 influencer in the UK. In cloud, I'm one of the top. I think this week I'm 28th, but you know, it varies from week to week, depends on you having a good week. I've done a lot of stuff about open source stuff because I'm keen passionate about that, and I carry a lot of influence, a lot of the work I do. What am I up to at the moment? I'm still part-time I'm a cloud strategist for UK Cloud. They are the top player in the UK government tech arena. So you don't put a tax disc in your car anymore. It's all done online. They know if you're insured. They know if you're MOT'd. The government don't actually host that themselves. They get us to host it on their behalf, and we run it for them. Things like your tax return, something like there's a forum called G-Cloud, which is the framework for procuring technology that the government uses, and we've got about 30% market share. We're beating Amazon and Google and Microsoft in the cloud game, and we're just about the only segment anywhere in the world where all 3 of them are being beaten by a local player. And therefore that's a fairly unique success, and we've been the fastest growing technology company in the UK, so to be a strategist for them isn't such a bad claim to fame. I'm also a strategic advisor for Advice Cloud game, giving advice to people about how they can make the best use of cloud in the public sector. And I'm doing some presenting. There's some guys at Disruptive Live, and I'll come and talk a bit more about them later. I'm doing some presenting around that. I've formed my own consulting company. I'm running actually an agile group of tech focused comm specialists, and I've actually got my own social media platform. So those are some of the things that keep me busy. So those are the websites if you want to go and check them out. So cloud and beyond. This is what I'm really here to talk about. This is what I wanted to try and share with you, and I'm very happy to make this as interactive as possible. What I actually sought to do was, I've got to try and make this less dull. I've included a presentation that I did, a video that I did a couple of years ago as a kickoff for NetSuite, where I was the main guest. Given the context of where we've come from, there was a whole industry dominated by a few giants. You've got the mainframe and services empire. You've got the corporate applications and database empire, and the desktop and operating system empire, which obviously IBM, Oracle, and Microsoft. And obviously, the whole part of what we've been battling against, and I've been battling this very heavy in the public sector, was that these 3 companies dominated the whole environment. Something like over 80% of all contracts within, by contract value, still goes to a small number within the government sector of dominant suppliers. breaking that mold was what we tried to achieve with G-Cloud, and that was the whole promise of what we wanted to achieve with new models of procurement for IT. There is still a big agenda to try and provide a level playing field so all companies can compete. But thankfully, the hold that these companies has had over not only the public sector IT, but also IT across the board, has actually been enormously weakened. If we have a look at how things are going straightforward, all three of those have struggled with the change. The ones that have been most successful have been Microsoft with the Azure platform. But obviously, we entered a new era with cloud computing, and in the cloud era, there's a complete new set of major players out here. So a new era has begun. And so in the next generation of the cloud wars, we've got key players, including Amazon, who have come into the play. You also shouldn't discount Google, and of course Alibaba, who are obviously now have got a presence. They've got data centers in Europe. They've got a complete presence here. One of the things that we're seeing is one set of major global dominant players being replaced by another. And obviously, in the new born in the cloud arena, we've got new giants, the search engine giant, the retail giant, and the oriental giant. And it's actually trying to see how we can keep an open environment against those has been a big challenge. We advise a lot in terms of what the government should do in its procurement, and I work both on the advisory organisations and in one of the most largest local players. And what we're trying to do is to support an ecosystem of different players. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what the main pressures are in this particular arena. I apologise if the sound isn't great. So there are 5 main factors here. The first of all, one of the main things that most of the technology organizations have been operating under is a myth that they could just pull together various different technologies under an umbrella, and that clients would understand how it would solve their problems. There have been any number of technology players in this particular market who've been guilty of not actually providing solutions that actually directly address the problems of the people in the market. You need to have solutions that make problems go away, and part of the reason that we've been particularly successful in the market for the government sector is actually that is exactly the way that we address the issues here. The second myth is that your differentiation is what you offer, and you're better at than anyone else, so what else matters? Far too often, there are companies that believe that they're the best at what they do, and therefore that's all that counts. I'm sure that you will have clients in this particular arena, and those clients will all argue that they're the best, the leading company at this or something else out there. Unless it is actually viewed in terms from the customer's perspective in this way, it's totally irrelevant. And for half the companies claiming this are actually couching those particular terms in order to reflect themselves in a good light anyway. And it's a great source of complacency in the market. Another area that's of importance is looking at exactly how you take your differentiation forward. And part of what we've been doing in the public sector is we've been focusing on security and privacy as a key differentiator against most of the global giants. It's not, and another myth here, nobody competes directly with you as you're unique at what you do. In almost any niche, there are competitors out there. There are no truly uncontested markets, and therefore you really need to be serious about how you're positioning yourselves in order to actually compete in these particular realms. And also, rivals will find it impossible to match or copy what you do. In the cloud arena, actually seeking to do something and to copy people is easier than it's ever been. One of the other things that we need to focus on is actually how companies go to market. And many companies think that marketing is an afterthought. It's something that they should do if they've got the time and the budget. Companies need to, in the technology arena, need to be marketing-led. Otherwise, they will never create a sustainable differentiation in that market. This is a keynote I did in front of 2,500 people dressed as a Jedi. So try and picture me sort of keynoting to an enormous audience. Talking about the evil empires and how we've been able to address them. And actually, part of what I've been doing as a champion for the open source movement with OpenStack and a champion for privacy, challenging what many of the global giants are, is actually to try and challenge many of the entrenched positions that some of the key technology companies here. One of the things that we have here is actually we're massively out-armed if we're going to take on these large companies. UK Cloud, for example, has only got 200 people, and yet we've taken on global giants and beaten them at their own game. But it has meant that we'd have to be focused and skilled in exactly what we're doing. And unless you're focused, there is no way that you're going to be able to do that. And one of the things here is actually we need to be focused on having a consultative sale. That needs to be coming across it in all the communications that you're doing. No longer is it good enough for you to be transactional, to be talking about the technology. The consultative selling approach, and the same if you're trying to sell an historian, is actually talking about the issues, the features, the solutions that are actually going to solve people's problems. Beyond that, and I'll come to talk about skills, expertise, and eminence, because there are any number of companies out there that are skilled at what they do. Many of them are experienced as well. If you weren't skilled at what you do, you wouldn't be in business. And there's any number of companies that have got case studies and thought leadership to demonstrate that they're experienced in their own different areas. It is only those companies that become eminent and known for what they're doing in a particular market that are actually going to really be able to achieve it. And in order to do that, it takes an enormous amount of focus. But the benefits are that your marketing costs plummet because prospects come to your door, and also your cost of sales also plummets because actually your win ratio goes up enormously. And therefore it's focusing on how you're going to achieve eminence and how you're going to actually focus. And I'll come and talk about some of the technology trends and what's happening in those particular areas in a minute. And obviously, for some of the organisations I've called, it's been a real challenge to actually take this on. One of the things that we've sought to do in order to achieve it is influence, and most of that has come from a massive amount of social media output, the ability to actually have a far higher reach than a small organisation is going to do. We've been focusing on influencer marketing, content marketing, and social selling, and looking at the force of influence. So, I'll keep this playing. And one of the areas that we go into, and I think we can probably stop this now. I'll skip the last section of that. I'll plug it back in here, and I'll show you where we're going with this. So that gives you the context of where we've come from and what the challenges are for most of the players in the market. If I now skip back into my presentation and talk a little bit about where we are now and what the key technologies are, enormously with Facebooks and everything. But this has been an arena that a number of us have been championing for a very long time. Are any of you familiar with who Max Schrems is? Okay. One nod at the back. Okay. There was a data sharing agreement between Europe and America called Safe Harbor. This fell apart when there was a challenge against Facebook in about 2011, 2012. The challenge dragged on for some time. And the agreement fell apart, and it was eventually replaced by Privacy Shield. Most of the complaints around the time that were initially brought by an Austrian legal student called Max Schrems were around Facebook's not only its own use of the data, but the way it was sharing data with disreputable third parties. Now, they tried to make as much noise as they could about it back in 2012, but there were very few people listening. And therefore, it's a massive uphill struggle. And Facebook assured the European Union and the courts that everything was fine, all have everything under control. And therefore the recent blow up with Cambridge Analytica and everyone has actually been a time bomb that has been ticking for some time, because all of that has been going on. It's only just been exposed. One of the things around GDPR is that there are a number of derogations in GDPR. First of all, there are derogations for journalism. Journalists are allowed to report the truth, and if there are articles of fact that they have published, you're not allowed to ask them to remove those articles from their news archives. And there was a very recent test case where somebody who had a criminal record that was spent tried to do exactly this. He failed in his challenge against the newspapers, and again it's appealed, so he eventually went against Google and asked Google to remove all links to the newspaper, and Google tried to stand up and claim that the journalistic exemption applied to it as well. Actually, that was shot down. Google isn't seen as a journalistic entity. In many instances, it's argued that it isn't anyway, because it doesn't take any responsibility for any of the content that it comes through its searches. But what this meant was that the principle about a journalistic exemption was upheld in the courts, and therefore the principle here is that if you go directly to the website of a newspaper, you can search back through all of its archives and you can find certain different articles, even if people have asked for them to be taken down in the right to be forgotten, because the newspapers have an exemption. The police and the security services, they also have an exemption. You can't phone the police and ask them to remove your criminal record because you don't like it. And there are other justifications around you need to keep records in order to be compliant with tax laws and any of the other local laws that are in force. One of the other provisions that was included in GDPR was the fact that there was no provision set out at a governmental level to protect the likes of you and I and all the individuals. There are DPAs, or data protection authorities, in all the individual countries, and the ICA in the UK is the DPA in this particular country. The thing to note is that the ICO is not receiving any extra resources with the arrival of GDPR. Therefore, there is an organisation that is already fairly stretched, that has a massive new responsibility on its plate, and is going to have no extra resources for enforcement. And therefore, the chances are that it is only ever going to have the time, the resource and the energy to go after the most egregious, outrageous abuses. That means that individuals like the rest of us simply aren't going to have any effective representation in privacy terms. However, GDPR allowed for an NGO or any number of NGOs to be formed to do exactly that, because they saw a gap in the market. Max came back into the story just towards the end of last year, when he was trying to get a crowdfunding off the ground to fund an NGO to provide pan-European representation across the board to give support to all our privacy rights. He was struggling in around December, and so I stepped in, used some of my social presence and networks. We managed to create a Twitter storm of over 1 million tweets, and I got him some TV coverage and in the press. And actually, after the crowdfunding initially stalled, we actually managed to get more than the 250,000 target and get close to 350,000. So hopefully in the near future that NGO will be launched. It's called None of Your Business. It will act as a central European resource, so that anyone in the individual countries bringing a case against a giant like Facebook or something like that has some best in class support, advice, whatever, to take their cases forward. The other thing is I'll be providing PR support to them, because the last thing we want to do is to have to go to court every time. If we can shame them in the press and get people to do the right thing without them having to go to court, then that's just as good an outcome as far as we're concerned. The reason that we need this is that if you as individuals wanted to bring a case against Microsoft for damages of £800 or something like that, it would cost you at least double that to get them into court. Whereas if NOYB supports class action suits sort of in the individual countries and provides a coordinating mechanism for people to reach across the whole of Europe to have a collective voice, then if we can get 10,000 or 100,000 people together in a collective suit against one of these people, suddenly you're talking about massive damages, and the shared legal costs are minimal, and the chances of them with some of our PR actually backing down before we get to court is very high. So that's some of the things I've been involved with on the PR front, and hopefully what we've done in crowdfunding and New NGO is actually not only going to protect your privacy, but your children's privacy and everyone beyond that. And it's an area I'm passionate about, and I do all my privacy work on a pro bono basis because I'm passionate in that particular arena. But the one thing that we may see is some sort of social regulation following on from the privacy regulation. There are people already talking about that in the US. Multi-cloud. Now, I talked a bit earlier in the Star Wars video, which I hoped would have had some sound, but was obviously had less of an impact without it. I was talking there about the giants. And one of the issues here, and anyone who's lived through different cycles of technology, is there is a massive fear of lock-in. People in the past have been locked into mainframes, or they've been locked into Oracle estates, or they've been locked into any number of other proprietary technology environments. There are any number of people who have the scars to show that. The last thing that we want to do in this new era is to stumble into the same mistake that we've made in the past. And therefore there is a massive debate here between whether you go all in on a single cloud or whether you go for a multi-cloud solution. Now, it's horses for courses here, and it depends who you are. On a personal basis, some of you have the choice of whether to go all in on Apple and have an iPhone and an iMac and every other Apple device, so they all integrate particularly well, but then you're stuck with that ecosystem if you ever want to do anything different. The same applies in the cloud arena. But one of the issues that most people have in that area, and if you've lived and breathed as a cloud service provider, you'll be very familiar with this, most people are not starting from scratch. It's okay for your startup who can set up a whole new set of systems in the cloud. They want to be Netflix, they want to do whatever they do, and all they've got is new cloud native applications. Those sit particularly well in some of these new platforms. If you're coming from a legacy position, the plain fact is that legacy applications do not work natively in the cloud. You either need to consider some sort of rewrite, or you need to actually have an engineer a way of achieving that. Now, there are certain clouds that are actually more legacy friendly. So if let's say you've got a legacy estate that's virtualized, you can lift and shift virtualized environments into a VMware cloud. Now, VMware clouds aren't the sort of all singing, all dancing thing that you get with AWS or Azure, but you do have a platform that you can take legacy environments and then within the cloud link them up to other clouds. You also need to understand that multi-cloud is almost inevitably a reality for most organizations. Most organizations, well, many of them will have something like Salesforce or some other CRM system that will be reliant on. They may have a marketing cloud. They may have any other specific applications that are all cloud-based that they're integrating. And those systems may not be some of their core systems, but they're very important to be integrated with whatever is core. When you look at your core systems, there will be a whole host of a hodgepodge of different platforms they're coming from. You may be coming from an Oracle estate, and there would be an argument to going for an Oracle cloud, although Oracle workloads do run well in Microsoft and AWS. You could have a Microsoft estate, and the assumption would be that you would go to Azure. But actually, again, Microsoft workloads don't run badly in some of the other clouds. But you need to be thinking about what your sprawl, what your heterogeneous environment is before you go there. And there is a massive discussion on the moment between the trade-off between going all in on a particular cloud and going multi-cloud. Now, there are advantages with going all in on a single cloud. If you go, let's say, to AWS and you go into Lambda and you start using all its functions, you will get enormous functionality from that. But the moment you start developing to their APIs and to their high-level feature sets, you are locked in. Actually picking that apart and finding something equivalent elsewhere isn't going to happen. So if AWS were ever to lose the ball or slow down in their rate of innovation or up their prices, you just got to live with it. And that is the lock-in argument that everyone fears. You also got to understand that however much you try and mandate a single platform, certain platforms aren't going to be right for everything. The examples being if you've got specialist things like Salesforce or other things running elsewhere. Also, you've got shadow IT. You've got people within the business doing their own thing anyway, even if you try and mandate a particular infrastructure. And therefore, there's a big debate that, in fact, in about a week's time, the Cloud Show on Disruptive TV has a live a debate, cloud multi-cloud or single cloud, and I'm on that program arguing very heavily in favor of multi-cloud. One of the reasons why many of the smaller companies are arguing around multi-cloud is that they simply don't have the unitary stack that some of the major vendors do. But each of those unitary stacks are very different in nature. AWS is actually incredibly self-centric. It doesn't want to know about hybrid. It doesn't want to know about multi-cloud. AWS are in a market position that they can afford to be fairly arrogant about everything on AWS or not. Microsoft have a background where they have always had a large partner ecosystem when they were selling software packages through their Microsoft partners. They have been, in this generation, equally a partner and ecosystem oriented, and the Azure stack is their offering in that particular arena. The Azure stack is a stack of the same software and appliances that you would find on Microsoft's Azure cloud platform, but in an appliance, in a stand-up unit. There are different OEMs selling it. There's HP, there's Cisco, Dell, all selling one of those appliances that you can just have either UK Cloud. We have an Azure appliance, one of the first anywhere in Europe to have a Cisco one. And we've stood that up in order to provide an Azure platform to our clients. It's enormously attractive because it allows us to provide a multi-cloud portfolio under a single roof. But obviously, that is Microsoft's approach. They are effectively giving partners and people who are interested in hybrid a leg up and an opportunity to approach cloud in that particular manner. Google have actually been very focused at the two opposite ends of the spectrum. Their Google Works has been very SME oriented and it has had very little traction outside the SME community. Gmail and all the other Google Docs and whatever. But at the same time, they've also got some very, very large accounts, the likes of Netflix and others that they've managed to attract onto their platform, often enticing them away from some of the other major competitors. Now, if you put yourselves in the shoes of someone like UK Cloud, who are we may be one of the biggest in the UK, but we're nothing like the size, we're a couple hundred people, we're nothing like the size of one of the global players. The only way we can compete is we don't have a technology stack of our own, but we could offer a multi-cloud offering. So we have a VMware platform. It is actually the largest multi-tenant VMware platform in Europe. No small deal. We also have an OpenStack environment for people who want to go cloud native and want to have that sort of open approach. We also have an Azure stack, and we have the Oracle equivalent. Oracle have launched their own appliance, Cloud at Customer. And we have other Oracle cloud offering as well. And of course, we have containers and other things, and a container management platform, and I'll come on to talk to containers in a bit. So from our perspective, our differentiation is we can provide all that, but we provide it in a super secure environment. Because we only live and operate in the UK, we can give our clients a UK data sovereignty guarantee. None of the data will ever leave these shores because we don't have any facilities elsewhere. Also, I was talking earlier about Privacy Shield and some of the privacy arrangements. There has been a new Cloud Act enforced in America. Even before that, there was Rule 51 and a whole load of different, somewhat aggressive extraterritorial measures that the US authorities had taken, which means that they are seeking to actually be able to serve warrants in the US to seize data that is held offshore. There's a big difference here if you are hosting information with a US operator, be it Amazon or Microsoft or Google or anyone else. If they are based in the US or have any US operations, then they are subject to the US, the reach of the US legal system. We are beyond the reach of the US legal system, so any warrants issued in the US won't come to us. There will be no snooping by the NSA, there will be no snooping by the CIA or anyone else, because so that for us, that is a major differentiator. We are the biggest player in this market. We are specialists and totally dedicated and focused on the UK government sector and health sector technology. By being specialists, by being the best at what we do, we're able to beat the big boys out of the market, but only by remaining focused, only by having a differentiation around privacy and sovereignty, and only being really good at what we do. And having a full multi-cloud proposition doesn't do us any harm at all, because many of our clients have a whole hodgepodge of different systems that they bring in with us. In the GovTech arena, one of the big challenges for the government has been about digital transformation. I mentioned earlier about your tax discs. You're already probably filing your tax returns online. The government wants to digitize as much as possible, and it is trying to drive as many of the government departments to transform digitally as they can. There is enormous resistance to that. The mandarins within our government silos aren't particularly open to some of the transformation, the technology, but we're evangelizing as much as we can. The other big thing is Brexit. Brexit in some ways has been an inhibitor, because the moment Brexit was announced, all decision making on anything else came to a halt. But there are some government departments that are going to have to transform the way they do things, be it rural payments or whatever, in order to prepare themselves for the new world after Brexit. And that is possibly going to mandate some form of radical digital transformation. So it's going to be very interesting to see that. And you're seeing parallels in other sectors, but I happen to live and breathe the government sector. The next one is AI. Obviously, AI is going to have a massive impact across the board. Almost every sector and in almost every different operation, there is some potential for AI. Now, obviously, it is going to start by replacing some of the repetitive tasks, some of the clerical functions that computers are really good at. The things that humans are particularly good at are complex communication and problem solving. Therefore, to give you an example of what the difference is, in the legal environment, there is going to be a massive impact from AI. All the paralegals who spend their time searching through documentation for doing research and other things like that, trying to find sort of examples of various different findings, they're no longer going to be employed, because AI can do that so much more efficiently. I mean, that's the sort of task that AI is set up to do. However, the sort of complex communication that a barrister does in court is actually something that a computer would never be set up to do. Again, in medicine, we have doctors who are constantly trying to stay, GPs or whoever, who are trying to stay up to date on all the latest medical research and whatever. It's something that they're never going to be able to read all the different papers, they're never going to be up to speed on all the different potential maladies. But AI can ingest all that information, but it will never replace the doctor. So there will be, as in many other areas, there will be far more augmentation than there will be replacement. So the augmentation will be the assistance that the doctors will get, the assistance that you will get in the legal systems, and it will happen across the board. Containers is another area. Are you all familiar with what containers are in cloud terms? Okay. So a while ago, people started to see some of the challenges with programming in the cloud, being the fact that actually, when you're spinning up cloud instances all of the different time, there is a massive amount of shift of resources and all different, and actually it pays to have a level of portability so that you can move things wherever you go, and it would be nice to move them onto any number of platforms. The idea behind containers was that you would have a single instance contained in a portable unit that would run itself, that would be easy to link to others, and that you can lift and shift whenever it was convenient. Initially, when containers came out, they were only Linux containers, so they only really applied to people with Linux applications or people who wanted to do stuff that was cloud native. The technology has moved on at a rapid pace, and now you can drop Microsoft applications into containers. You can even do ZOS, mainframe applications can be dropped into containers. There is an enormous amount that can be done now that wasn't even achievable a short while ago. And also you have container management systems. You have federated containers, means a set of federated containers could be a cluster that was based on more than one cloud. So if you had two different data centers, one be Azure and one AWS, within the same geographic region, so there wasn't too much latency before, you could run a federated cluster of containers across both of them, and therefore it becomes reasonably academic about the platform that you're on. There is obviously a slight overhead in terms of performance in running containers, because all of the extra wrap that you do has a performance implication. But in terms of development terms, the skills in actually having to learn all the different nuances, all the different platforms, goes away if you're just learning containers, because you develop to the container. You don't necessarily have to develop to the host environment. Containers are therefore giving some people the promise of portability. You also have something in that arena called the Open Services Broker. The Open Services Broker enables you to actually be far more effective in the way that you're linking up different containers, and there's standard APIs and whatever. The next one is Edge and IoT. Obviously, there's been a massive move of stuff into the cloud, and we've seen all of the massive growth in cloud that's occurred. There was a time a short while ago when people were asking, well, should we or shouldn't we about cloud? Now normally the discussion is, well, how quickly do we do it, and what type of cloud do we do? Because the assumption is that most things are moving in that direction. However, one of the things that you have in those sort of instances is there are some issues with data sovereignty, and I talked earlier about how we offer a data sovereignty guarantee, and there will be issues about certain types of data going offshore. And we happen to work in the public sector, so that we protect criminal records, we protect tax records, we protect health records. I'm sure that you would want all of those types of sensitive data to remain in this country. And when surveyed, most people said that they would. There are also latency issues about where you take the data. If stuff is too far, there's going to be too much of a time lag, and there will be latency issues about how you do that. There's also bandwidth issues, and you just need to think about the massive amounts of data that you're sometimes dealing with. And there are real nuances about different platforms and a lot of hidden charges. If you're familiar with what ingress and egress are, which are very lovely, colourful words for shifting data up into the cloud and getting it out again. There are normally charges for ingress and egress. Typically, they charge you more for egress, because they're going to charge you for getting your data back out of the cloud, because they know that once you've shoved it all into the cloud, you're stuck with them. But you have to factor in ingress and egress charges when you're looking at these sort of things. And also, the simple bandwidth. I mean, one of the largest data sets that we host is Genomics England, which is the 100,000 Genome Project, which is one of the largest medical data sets in the UK. Now, if you are a pharmaceutical company and you want to run some research linked to that, You're not going to be able to rock up with a memory stick and say, can I borrow a copy of your data? Because they don't make memory sticks that big. And also, if you wanted to have to query it, you're not going to want to query it from too much of a distance. So it would make sense, and it's totally feasible, to locate an application very close to where the data set is in order to do that. And that's a term called data gravity. You gravitate towards wherever the large data sets are, because querying them is the most of the bandwidth. Sending the results back was actually the latency doesn't matter, and the amount of I/O transfer is very low. What's occurred with the ideas around edge and IoT is that we are going to have a massive proliferation, we already do, of different devices all spewing out data that is somehow being collected in the cloud and being made sense of. Well, that was talking about a massive rise in the amount of data that we're going to have to handle. There is an enormous amount to be said for doing limited processing on the edge. So if you've got a sensor that is collecting data all the time, you don't necessarily want to be that sensor to be sending a stream of data and you having to store all that data. A lot of that data you don't need. You just need to do some very simple conclusions from that data to make a small amount of sense of it. And once you've done that small amount of processing, it's sending the results centrally. And that actually reduces the latency from the sensor position. It prevents you having sensors that sort of lose connectivity, being unable to operate. They'll have a level of intelligence locally in order to operate sensibly. And also, it helps you with your data management centrally. So we're going to actually see edge devices, and you're also going to see it's not only just going to be the IoT devices, you're also going to see federated clouds. So you will have some sort of processing capabilities closer to wherever the sort of geographic locations are, especially if you've got reasonably memory hungry or IO hungry applications. So those are some of the changes that we're going to see across the board. I've talked far too much here. Any questions, or you want to pick my brains on anything, or we carry on? Okay, we'll have Q&A at the end then. Okay. So the next thing is how does all this affecting the way that we communicate? Obviously, the old way of working in the technology arena has largely fallen apart. A lot of the trade shows that used to exist have died. Many of the publications are struggling. Part of the reason is that decision making used to go as far as a point of consideration where if you were buying a digital camera or whatever, you would rock up to Jessop's or Dixon's, have a look at a camera, speak to a salesperson, or you might even go to a trade show or do something like that. People aren't doing that anymore. People are actually going all the way through to the point of evaluation, and almost all the research is being done online. People are said to be somewhere from between 2/3 and 90% of their way through their journey before they ever reach out to a vendor. And therefore the challenge for vendors such as ourselves, we're a cloud player, and we're not as well known as Amazon or Microsoft, so they've got the name recognition advantage over us. We happen to be a specialist in our field, but therefore we have to have a massive social presence. We have to do everything we can to ensure that we're visible in the market. And the same challenge is going to be true for anyone operating in the technology arena. Beyond that, in that particular equation, social really matters. From that particular perspective, when I started out in this particular business, getting an article in computing was the main aim that we used to seek to do. But obviously, computing is still around, so are most of those publications. But the effectiveness of that is starting to be drawn into question. Last month, computing had 170,000 visitors to its website. If we go down, I'm the main champion and spokesperson for my company. If we happen to look at what my reach was, and I will just tell you in real time, I will come out of here, and I will go into here and show you in real time what my reach, right, this is just my Twitter, my statistics for the last month. and it's fallen off the screen here. I don't know why it's not. Okay, the figures here are 12.2 million. That's the people I've reached in the last 30 days. And I'm using a platform to do that, and there's certain tactics in order to do that. But the idea that you have to go through the traditional challenge to achieve those type of things are actually outdated. There is an enormous amount that you can do. We're a small 200-person company. We're punching way above our weight. We're actually causing many of the global players nightmares in this particular country because we are championing very severely issues around privacy and sovereignty that really count. And we're doing that from a very low base with very low cost. So I would encourage you on that particular one to go and have a look at, there's an interview on Analytica, who are the influence specialists, who talk about influencer management. What I try to do is some of my social media reach, I try to use it for good, and that was around the campaign to get NOYB off the ground, and that was particularly effective. We did a Twitter storm to make that effective, and through social media we do an enormous amount of very targeted, very tailored stuff in order to make that sort of reach. So there is an enormous amount you can achieve, and I'm very happy to if you've got questions around that as well as cloud, to answer any questions you have.